You're an embarrassment to stand next to." Nathan Collins threw the words across their Manhattan living room, then reached out and unclasped the diamond necklace from around Emily's throat, dropping it into the open palm of the younger woman beside him. "Victoria wears it better." Emily didn't move. 12 years of marriage, and this was how it ended, not with a conversation, but with a robbery dressed up as an upgrade. What Nathan Collins didn't know, as he smiled at the woman he called his future, was that he had just insulted the richest woman in the entire city. If you love stories where the person everyone underestimated turns out to hold every card, subscribe to the channel and follow this story all the way to the end. And comment the city you're watching from right now so I can see just how far Emily's story has traveled. The necklace sat in Victoria Hayes' hand like it had always belonged there. Emily Anderson stared at it, at the way the diamonds caught the gray morning light, at the way Victoria's fingers curled around it without hesitation, without shame, without even a flicker of the discomfort a decent person might feel taking jewelry off another woman's neck in that woman's own home. "Nathan," Emily said quietly. "That was mine." "It was a gift," Nathan said. "Gifts get passed on. You gave it to me on our 5th anniversary, and now it means something else." He shrugged the way a man shrugs when he has already decided that your feelings are a problem to be managed rather than a truth to be heard. "Things change, Emily. People change. You should have seen it coming." She had seen it coming. That was the part nobody would ever understand. She had watched it approach for 2 years, the way you watch a storm build over the water, knowing it will reach you eventually, knowing there is no wall high enough to keep it out. She had felt Nathan pulling away one dinner at a time, one late night at a time, one clipped answer at a time. She had lain awake beside a man who slept with his back to her and told herself she was imagining the distance. She had not been imagining it. "How long?" Emily asked. Nathan's jaw tightened. "Does it matter? To me it does." 8 months. It was Victoria who answered, not Nathan. Victoria, 28 years old, poised unbothered, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Emily's entire visible wardrobe. 8 months if you want the exact number. Nathan and I met at the Halloran acquisition dinner. You weren't there. You never came to those things. I wasn't invited to those things. Weren't you? Victoria tilted her head. Or did you just decide they weren't for you? Emily looked at her husband. Is that what you told her? That I refused to be part of your world? Nathan didn't answer, and his silence was an answer. You told her I chose to stay home, Emily said slowly, the understanding arriving in her chest like cold water. You told her I was the wife who didn't want the life you were building. You made me the small one in the story. You are the small one in the story, Emily. Nathan's voice sharpened. That's not cruelty. That's just what happened. You got comfortable. You stopped growing. I kept going, and you stayed exactly where you were, and one day I looked over, and there was nothing next to me but a woman who reminded me of who I used to be. Do you understand how suffocating that is? To be reminded every single day of the version of yourself you're trying to leave behind? The apartment went silent. Emily heard the refrigerator hum in the kitchen. She heard a car horn far below on the street. She heard her own heartbeat steady, slower than it should have been, and she noticed with a strange detachment that her hands weren't shaking. She had expected them to shake. Say it again, she said. Say what? The version of yourself you're trying to leave behind. Say it again. Nathan exhaled through his nose. I don't have time for this. You had 12 years, Nathan. You had 12 years and now you don't have 5 minutes. Emily's voice did not rise. That was what unsettled him. She could see it in the way his eyes narrowed. He had braced for screaming. He had rehearsed the scene where she wept and clung and begged, and he had planned his patient superior responses. He had not planned for calm. The version of yourself you're trying to leave behind. Do you even remember that man? Because I do. Emily. I remember him eating cold rice out of the pot because we couldn't afford 2 plates worth of gas to heat the stove twice. I remember him crying in the bathroom the night the Delgado deal fell through and me sitting on the floor outside the door because he wouldn't let me in, but he didn't want to be alone either. I remember writing his business plan at 2 in the morning while he slept because he had a meeting at 8 and the numbers were wrong, and if I didn't fix them, he was going to walk into that room and lose everything. Her throat tightened just slightly, just once, and she pushed through it. I remember all of him, every ugly, frightened, desperate part of him, and I loved all of it. So don't stand in my living room and tell me you're trying to leave that man behind. That man is the only part of you I ever respected. For a moment, just a moment, something cracked in Nathan's face. Then it sealed over. That's exactly the problem, he said. You love who I was. Victoria loves who I'm becoming. Victoria smiled. Emily looked at that smile and felt the last soft thing inside her go quiet and cold. Nathan reached into his leather portfolio and pulled out a stack of papers, thick stapled, tabbed with little colored flags where signatures were required. He set them on the glass table between them with a soft, deliberate thud. Divorce papers, he said. My lawyer drew them up. I'm being generous, Emily, genuinely. You'll get the settlement, a monthly figure for 3 years to help you get back on your feet, and you keep your personal belongings. I'm not going to fight you. I don't want a war. I just want this to be clean and fast and over. Emily looked down at the papers. Generous. 3 years to get back on your feet. As though she were a woman who could not stand without his hand under her elbow, as though the life they had was a boat he owned and was now out of kindness allowing her to swim away from. You're being generous, she repeated. I am. Nathan, she almost laughed. She caught it in her throat, and it came out instead as a long, slow breath. You have no idea what generous even means. Sign the papers, Emily. She reached for the pen. Victoria shifted her weight and the necklace glittered in her hand. And here is the thing that would haunt Nathan Collins for the rest of his life, though he did not know it yet, though he would not understand it for months. In that moment, Emily Anderson felt nothing that he expected her to feel. She did not feel betrayed because betrayal requires surprise, and she had run out of surprise months ago. She did not feel worthless because a person only feels worthless when they believe the one insulting them can see them clearly, and she understood with a clarity that startled her that Nathan had never once seen her clearly in 12 years. What she felt, sitting in the wreckage of the life she had built with her own 2 hands, was something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt free. She uncapped the pen. You know what my grandfather told me before he died? Emily said, not looking up. Nathan sighed, glancing at his watch. Emily, I don't think this is the moment for... He told me that money doesn't reveal who a person is. She pressed the pen to the first tabbed line. It reveals who they always were. He said a man's character is a photograph, and money is just the light you shine on it. Poverty keeps a person in shadow, but wealth... She signed her name in a slow, elegant hand. Wealth turns the flash all the way up, and you finally get to see the whole picture. That's very poetic. It's very true. She flipped to the second tab. Signed. I used to think you were kind because you didn't have anything to be cruel with. I thought your gentleness was your nature. She flipped again. Signed. But it wasn't your nature, Nathan. It was your poverty. The kindness left the second the money arrived. That's not a coincidence. That's a photograph finally developed. Nathan's face darkened. You think I don't have anything? You think you're the one who... I don't think anything. She signed the final line and set the pen down with a soft click. I know exactly what you have, and I know exactly what I have. And Nathan... She slid the papers back across the glass table toward him. For the first time in 12 years, those 2 things are not the same. Nathan snatched the papers up, irritated already, moving on already halfway out of the marriage in his mind. He didn't hear the warning in her voice. He never did. He glanced at the signatures to make sure they were real, and when he saw that they were, a small, satisfied smile touched the corner of his mouth. He thought he had won. He genuinely, completely believed that he had won. Thank you for being reasonable, he said. I mean that. A lot of women wouldn't be. I'm sure Victoria would have made it very difficult. Victoria's smile flickered just barely, but it flickered. Emily saw it. She saw everything now. That was the strange gift of the morning. With the fog of hope finally gone, she could see the whole room with a terrible, useful clarity. She could see that Victoria's confidence was not the confidence of a woman in love. It was the confidence of a woman executing a plan. She could see the way Victoria's eyes moved across the apartment, not with the wonder of someone imagining a future here, but with the quick assessing sweep of someone taking inventory, counting, pricing, cataloging what she was about to own. Emily filed that away. She did not know yet what it meant, but she knew it meant something. "When do you need me out?" Emily asked. "There's no rush," Nathan said in the magnanimous tone of a man being generous with a home he believed was his. "Take the week. Take 2 honestly. I'll be at Victoria's. This place is—" He glanced around, and there was something dismissive in the glance, something that suggested the apartment too had become part of the version of himself he was leaving behind. "This place is yours to close out. I'll have movers handle the rest." "That's kind of you." "I'm not a monster, Emily." "No," she agreed softly. "You're something worse. You're a man who thinks he's a good one." Nathan blinked. For a half-second, he almost asked her what she meant. She watched the question form behind his eyes, and she watched him decide it wasn't worth the effort. Decide that whatever she meant, it was one of those small, wounded, wife-shaped observations that no longer had any power to touch him. He tucked the papers into his portfolio. "Come on," he said to Victoria. "We're late for the Renfield thing." Victoria uncurled from where she had been leaning against the doorframe. She crossed the room, and as she passed the table, she paused, and she looked at Emily with an expression that would in the coming months cost her everything. "For what it's worth," Victoria said, "I don't think you're a bad person. I think you're just a woman who forgot to be interesting. It happens. You give everything to a man, and there's nothing left over to build a self with. Nathan needs a partner, not a project." She fastened the necklace around her own throat as she spoke, the diamonds settling against her skin. "This looks better on me anyway. Don't you think?" Emily looked at the necklace. She looked at the woman wearing it. And then Emily Anderson smiled, a small, quiet, patient smile that Nathan halfway to the door did not see, but that Victoria did. And something in that smile made the younger woman go still. "You know," Emily said, "you're the first person in this apartment today who's told me the truth." "What truth?" "That I gave everything and kept nothing." Emily rose from the couch, smoothing her plain gray sweater, unhurried, entirely calm. "You're wrong about the reason, but you're right about the fact. I did give everything. For 12 years I gave, and I let myself become invisible because I wanted to know if a man could love a woman who had nothing to offer him but herself." She looked at Nathan's back as he waited at the door, impatient, checking his phone. "I have my answer now, so thank you, truly. You've both been very clarifying." Victoria hesitated. There was something in the older woman's composure that did not fit the script. In the version Victoria had been told, the version Nathan had sold her, the version she had half-built herself out of assumptions, Emily was supposed to be broken. Emily was supposed to be a soft, sad, ordinary woman, a doormat with a face, a discarded thing. This woman was not broken. This woman was watching them the way a chess player watches an opponent who has just made a fatal move without realizing it. "Let's go," Nathan called. Victoria went. But at the door, she looked back one more time, and Emily was still standing there in the middle of the living room, in her plain gray sweater, in the apartment she was being so generously permitted to vacate, and she was still smiling that small, patient smile. The door closed, and Emily Anderson stood alone in the silence for a long, long time. She did not cry. She had thought she would. She had imagined this moment more than once in the worst of the sleepless nights, and in every version of it she had collapsed the instant the door closed. She had pictured herself on the floor, undone, hollowed out, weeping for the life she had lost. Instead, she stood perfectly still and felt the apartment settle around her, and she waited for the grief to come. It didn't come. What came instead was a memory. She was 23 years old, and she was sitting across a wide oak desk from her grandfather, Harold Anderson, the man who had built Anderson Legacy Holdings out of a single failing textile mill and turned it over 50 relentless years into one of the largest privately held investment empires in the United States. He was dying then, though he refused to use the word. He called it winding down. He had a way of making even death sound like a business decision. "I'm going to tell you something," Harold had said, his voice thin, but his eyes still sharp as broken glass. "And I need you to listen to me the way you've never listened to anyone in your life. Can you do that?" "Yes, Grandpa." "When I die, you're going to be rich. Not comfortable. Not well off. Rich in a way that changes the physics of your life. Rich in a way that bends every room you walk into." He'd leaned forward, and it had cost him something to do it, and she'd started to help him, and he'd waved her off. "And here is what that money is going to do to you, Emily. It is going to make it impossible for you to ever know if you are loved." "That's not true. People love me now." "People love the version of you that can't do anything for them. Wait until you're the version that can." He'd sat back, breathing hard. "Everyone will smile at you. Everyone will laugh at your jokes. Everyone will tell you that you're brilliant and beautiful and kind. And you will never, not once, not for the rest of your life, know if a single word of it is true. Because you will always know, always, that you are the most useful person in every room. And usefulness is a poison, Emily. It looks exactly like love from the outside. From the inside, it's the loneliest thing there is." She had not understood him then. She understood him now. "So here's what I want you to do," Harold had said. "I'm going to structure the estate so that no one knows. Not your friends, not the press, not the man you marry. It will be held in trust, quiet, invisible, and you will access it through people you trust and no one else. And you are going to go out into the world, and you are going to live like an ordinary woman. A woman with a job and a small apartment and a used car. And you are going to find out who loves you when you have nothing to give them. And once you know that, once you truly, absolutely know that, then you can turn the light on. Then you can be who you are, but not one day before." "That sounds like a test," Emily had said. "That sounds like a cruel, exhausting test." Harold had smiled, and there had been something terribly sad in it. "It is a test," he'd said. "The cruelest one there is. And I'm sorry to hand it to you, but I've watched money destroy every honest relationship in this family for 50 years, Emily. Your father, your aunts, my own marriage. I would rather hand you a hard truth than a comfortable lie. The people who pass this test, and there won't be many, those are the only people in your entire life you will ever be able to fully believe. Isn't that worth a few years of a small apartment and a used car?" She had promised him. She had buried him 3 weeks later. And she had kept the promise for 11 years through a marriage to a man she met at a coffee shop when he had holes in his shoes and a dream too big for his voice to carry. A man she chose precisely because he wanted nothing from her, because he could see nothing to want. She had loved Nathan Collins because he loved a woman with nothing. And now she stood in the ruins of that love and understood at last the second half of her grandfather's warning, the half she had been too young and too hopeful to hear. It wasn't only wealth that revealed a person's character. It was the arrival of it in someone else. Nathan had never been tested by her money because he'd never known about it. He'd been tested by his own, and the second Nathan Collins tasted a fortune that felt like his. The second the flash went off and lit the whole photograph, the man she'd loved had simply dissolved, and this other man had stepped forward out of the developing tray fully formed, and Emily realized with a sick, quiet certainty that this other man had always been there, waiting for the light. Emily walked to the window. 24 floors below, the city moved the way it always moved. Indifferent, enormous, full of people who thought they knew who mattered and who didn't. She could see from here 3 of the buildings that carried Nathan's name in gold letters on their lobbies. The Collins Tower on 53rd, the Collins Renfield development rising half-built over the old rail yards, the glass office block on Park where his company kept its headquarters, where he sat every day at the top and believed the whole thing was his. Emily looked at all 3 of them. And then very quietly in the empty apartment, she said something out loud that no one heard. "You built all of that," she said, "on land you don't own." She let the words hang there. Because they were true. Every one of those buildings, every project, every deal, every triumphant press release with Nathan Collins standing at a podium in a suit that had gotten more expensive every year. Every single one of them stood, whether Nathan knew it or not, on a foundation with her grandfather's fingerprints all over it. On leases signed with entities Nathan had never traced to their source. On an emergency investment 5 years ago that had saved his company from bankruptcy in a single afternoon from a fund whose managing partner Nathan had never once thought to actually meet. Nathan had spent 12 years building an empire. He had built it on Emily. He simply didn't know it yet. The phone rang. Emily let it ring twice before she answered, because she already knew who it was, because there was only one person who would be calling her on this particular morning on this particular line. The private one, the one Nathan had never had the number to, the one that connected her to the other half of her life. "Michael," she said. "Emily." Michael Reynolds had been the Anderson family's attorney for 30 years. He had drafted her grandfather's will. He had held her hand at the funeral. He had spent 11 years being the quiet architect of her invisible life, moving money, managing trusts, signing where she could not be seen to sign. His voice when he spoke was careful. "I heard. I'm so sorry. Are you—" "I'm fine." "Emily." "I'm fine, Michael. I promise you. I'm better than fine, which is the part that's going to worry you." She turned from the window. "I signed the papers this morning." A pause. "You signed them, Emily. You didn't call me. You didn't let me review. I didn't need you to review them. I wanted them signed. I wanted it done." She walked slowly across the living room, trailing her fingers along the back of the couch where she had sat through 12 years of Nathan's late arrivals and hollow apologies. "He gave me a settlement, Michael. He was very proud of himself. He offered me 3 years of monthly payments to help me get back on my feet." The silence on the line was extraordinary. And then Michael Reynolds began very quietly to laugh. It was not a cruel laugh. It was the helpless, astonished laughter of a man confronting an absurdity too large to hold. "He offered you," Michael managed, "a settlement." "He did. Nathan Collins offered Emily Anderson a settlement, with a monthly stipend, to get back on my feet." "Oh, Emily." Michael's laughter faded into something graver. "You know I have to ask. You've been protecting him for 12 years. Every time his company wobbled, every time a deal went sideways, you had me quietly steady the ground under his feet, and you never let him know it was you. I did it because you asked me to. I did it because you loved him." He paused. "You don't love him anymore." It was not a question. "No," Emily said. "I don't." "Then I have to ask you something, and I need you to think before you answer, because once we move, we can't unmove. Do you understand? The foundations you laid under that man, I can leave them exactly where they are. He'll never know. He'll go on building his empire on your land forever, none the wiser, and you can walk away and start a new life and let him have his illusion." Michael took a breath. "Or you can turn on the light." Emily stopped walking. She stood in the center of the apartment where she had been 20 minutes ago, an ordinary discarded wife. And she thought about the necklace glittering on Victoria's throat, and she thought about her grandfather dying, telling her that once she truly knew who loved her and who did not, she could finally be who she was. She knew now. God help her, she knew. "Michael," Emily said, "there's something you need to look into first before we do anything." "Anything you need." "The girl, Victoria Hayes. She's a corporate attorney 28 at Bell Renwick." Emily's eyes had gone very still. When she was in this apartment today, she wasn't looking at Nathan. She was looking at everything he owns. She priced this place, Michael. I watched her do it. She was counting. Emily turned back to the window to the 3 buildings with Nathan's name on them. A woman doesn't fall in love with a man and spend the whole morning taking inventory of his real estate. That's not passion. That's due diligence. Michael was quiet for a moment. "You think she knows something?" "I think she knows Nathan's company better than Nathan does. I think she found something in his structure, some weakness, some door left open, and I think Nathan was never the prize." Emily's voice dropped. "I think he was the entry point, and I want to know into what. I'll pull everything. Bell Renwick's client list, her caseload, any connection to Nathan's investors, everything, Michael. And quietly. She can't know we're looking." "She won't." Emily nodded to herself. Outside, far below, a black car pulled away from the curb, and she wondered idly if it was Nathan's off to the Renfield thing, off to his glittering new life with the woman who wore stolen diamonds and counted furniture with her eyes. "There's one more thing," Michael said, and something in his tone made Emily's spine straighten. "I wasn't going to bring it up today, given everything, but you should know because it changes the shape of what you're deciding." "Tell me." "The emergency investment. 5 years ago, the one that saved Collins' development from insolvency." "I remember. I authorized it." "You authorized it," Michael said slowly, "but the paperwork that Nathan's people generated on their end, the terms they recorded, the terms he thinks he signed, they don't match ours. Emily, I've been sitting on this for 3 years, waiting for a reason to look closer, and after this morning, I finally have one." He took a breath. "The company Nathan runs doesn't just stand on your land. Under the real terms of that investment, the ones in our vault, not his, the fund you control, has the right at any time, with 60 days' notice, to convert its position into a controlling interest." The apartment went very quiet. "Say that again," Emily said. "Emily." Michael's voice was gentle and steady, and it landed in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. "You don't just own the ground Nathan Collins built his empire on. If you decide you want it, a pause, you own the empire." Emily Anderson stood at the window 24 floors above the city in a plain gray sweater in an apartment she had been so graciously permitted to vacate. And below her, catching the gray morning light, the gold letters of Nathan's name gleamed on 3 buildings that were, it turned out, hers to take whenever she chose. She did not smile. She had smiled enough for one morning. Instead, she simply looked out at all of it, the whole vast, indifferent city that had watched her be small for 12 years, and she felt something enormous and cold and certain settle into place behind her ribs. "Come to the apartment tomorrow morning," she said quietly. "Bring the vault documents. Bring everything on the girl. Bring the conversion papers. And then—" Emily closed her eyes. Somewhere across the city, Nathan Collins was walking into a room full of people who thought he was powerful, wearing a smile he believed he'd earned beside a woman he believed he'd chosen, having thrown away the only person who had ever truly known him. And he was at that very moment more certain of his own future than he had ever been in his life. He had no idea. He had no idea at all. "And then," Emily said, "we turn on the light." She hung up the phone. The silence rushed back in. But it was a different silence now. Not the silence of a woman who had lost everything, but the silence of a decision that had already been made, waiting only for the world to catch up to it. Emily stood in it for a long moment. Then she crossed to the closet by the front door, the one Nathan had never opened, because it held nothing but old coats and a battered filing box he'd assumed was full of tax receipts, and she knelt, and she lifted the box, and she carried it to the glass table where 20 minutes ago she had signed away a marriage. She set it down. She opened the lid. Inside, beneath a layer of harmless-looking paper, was a single manila folder, worn soft at the edges from 11 years of being moved and never opened. On the tab, in her grandfather's handwriting, because he had prepared it himself in his final weeks and made her promise not to open it until she was certain, were 3 words. "When you're ready." Emily's fingers rested on the folder for a long moment. Then, for the first time in 11 years, she opened it. And what she read on the first page made her sit down very slowly in the chair, because it was not what she had expected. Because her grandfather, it turned out, had known things about the future that no dying man should have been able to know, had left instructions that reached out of the grave and touched this exact morning, this exact betrayal, this exact woman standing in this exact apartment with a broken marriage at her feet. The first line read, "If you are reading this, then the man you chose has failed the test. I am sorry, Emily. I hoped I would be wrong. But if I am not, if he has looked at everything you are and decided it wasn't enough, then there is something about your marriage you never knew, something I discovered before I died and could not bring myself to tell you because you were happy, and I could not take that from you." Emily's hands had gone cold. She turned the page, and at the top of the second sheet in her grandfather's careful dying hand was a single name. It was not Nathan's. It was Victoria's. Emily stared at the name for a long time before she let herself breathe. Victoria Hayes. It was written in her grandfather's hand, the same careful slant she had grown up watching sign checks and contracts, and once a birthday card that said, "Only be brave," which was the most sentimental thing Harold Anderson had ever committed to paper. And now here was that same hand, reaching out of 11 years of silence, to write the name of the woman who had walked into Emily's apartment that morning, wearing Emily's diamonds. She read the sentence beneath it 3 times before it made sense. "I do not know this girl, but I know her father, and if a Hayes has come into your life, Emily, then nothing about it is an accident." Emily set the folder down on the glass table very carefully, the way you set down something that might go off. Then she picked up the phone again. It was 9:47 in the morning. Michael answered on the first ring, which meant he hadn't moved from wherever he'd been when they hung up, which meant he'd been waiting. "Michael, who is Hayes?" There was a pause on the line that lasted exactly 1 second too long. "Emily, my grandfather left me a folder. He wrote it before he died. Victoria's name is in it, and a note that says he knew her father, and that if a Hayes came into my life, it wouldn't be an accident. So I'm going to ask you again, and this time I want the whole answer and not the careful one. Who is Hayes?" She heard Michael exhale. "Gerald Hayes," he said finally. "He and your grandfather were partners, a long time ago. Before you were born, before there even was an Anderson Legacy Holdings the way you know it. They built the first 3 funds together." "I've never heard that name in my life." "No," Michael said. "You wouldn't have. Your grandfather spent 40 years making sure of it." Emily sat down slowly. "What did he do?" "Gerald Hayes tried to take the company." Michael's voice had gone flat and old, the voice of a man reciting something he'd hoped never to say aloud again. "In 1986, he forged your grandfather's signature on a transfer of controlling interest and nearly walked out the door with everything Harold had built. Your grandfather caught it 2 days before it would have been irreversible. 2 days, Emily. Any later, and there would have been no inheritance for you, no trust, no fortune, nothing. You'd have grown up the granddaughter of a man who got robbed. What happened to him, to Gerald?" "Harold buried him. Not literally. Financially, reputationally, completely." A pause. "He made sure Gerald Hayes never worked in this city again, never raised another dollar, never got within a mile of another partnership. He didn't just win Emily. He erased the man. And Gerald Hayes spent the rest of his life telling anyone who'd listen that Harold Anderson stole his life's work, that the company you're going to inherit was built on top of him." Emily closed her eyes. "And Victoria is his granddaughter," Michael said. "I'd bet my license on it. Gerald had 1 son. The son had 1 daughter." A beat. "If that daughter grew up on a story about the family that destroyed hers, and then she found her way into the life of a man whose entire company sits on Anderson land, then she's not here for Nathan," Emily finished, and her own voice sounded far away to her. "She never was. Nathan's just the door." "The door to you," Michael said quietly. "To the company, to finishing what her grandfather started." For a moment, neither of them spoke, and the silence carried the full weight of it. Emily had spent the morning believing she was the victim of an ordinary betrayal, the oldest story in the world, a man trading in his wife for someone younger, and it had felt in its way almost clean, almost simple. There was a settlement and a signed page and a door that had closed, and she could walk away from all of it into a new life. But it wasn't simple. It had never been simple. It was a 40-year-old wound that had grown a face and a name and a corporate law degree, and it had walked into her home that morning and taken the necklace off her neck, and it had smiled. "Michael," Emily said, "I need you here. Tonight, not tomorrow. Bring everything you have on the Hayes family. Bring the conversion documents. Bring my grandfather's original files on Gerald." She stood, and something had changed in the way she stood. "And I need one more thing." "Name it." "I need to know what Victoria found." Emily's jaw tightened. She didn't come after a company as strong as Nathan's without finding a crack in it first. She's an attorney. She reads structures. If she spent 8 months inside Nathan's life, she spent 8 months looking for the exact weakness her grandfather looked for in mine. I want to know what she found before she uses it. "You think she's close?" "I think, Tom," Emily said, that a woman who takes the necklace off your neck on the day she wins is a woman who thinks the game is almost over. She looked out the window at the 3 gold names on 3 buildings that were hers. She has no idea it hasn't started. She hung up. By 11 o'clock, she had packed a single suitcase, and she had done it without sentiment, which surprised her. 12 years in this apartment, and she found that almost nothing in it was worth carrying out. The art was Nathan's taste. The furniture was Nathan's status. The whole apartment, she realized, was a set that Nathan had built to display the man he wanted to be. And she had been living inside his stage the way a woman lives inside a life that was never really hers. She took her clothes. She took a photograph of her grandfather. She took the folder. She left the necklace's empty box on the counter open so that when the movers came, someone would notice it was gone. She did not go to a hotel. She went to a building on the Upper East Side that her grandfather had bought in 1971, and that had on paper belonged to a holding company for 50 years. A quiet, elegant building where the doorman had been told 11 years ago that a woman named Emily might one day appear, and that when she did, she was to be given the keys to the penthouse and asked no questions. His name was Walter. He was 73 years old. And when Emily walked through the door at 11:40 that morning with one suitcase and a folder under her arm, Walter looked at her for a long moment, and then his old face broke into something like grief and something like joy at the same time. "Miss Anderson," he said, "your grandfather told me you'd come. He said it might be years. He said I might not live to see it." His voice cracked. "I'm glad I did." Emily had never met this man in her life, but he had been waiting for her for 11 years, keeping a promise to a dead man, and something about that undid the composure she'd held all morning. She reached out and took his hand. "Did he tell you why I'd come?" "He said you'd come when the world finally showed you who it was." Walter pressed a set of keys into her palm, warm from his pocket. "He said when that day came, you shouldn't be alone. So I've kept the place ready. Every week. 11 years. He squeezed her hand. "Welcome home, Miss Anderson." Emily rode the elevator up to a penthouse she had never seen and found it exactly as her grandfather must have left it, spare, warm, full of books. Nothing like the glass museum she'd just left. There was a desk by the window. There was a fireplace. There was on the mantel a single photograph of Harold Anderson as a young man standing in front of a textile mill, squinting into the sun with his whole impossible future ahead of him. She put her suitcase down, and for the first time all day alone in a home that had been waiting for her for over a decade, Emily Anderson finally cried. It didn't last long, maybe 2 minutes. But she let it come standing in the middle of the room, and she cried, not for Nathan, and not for the marriage, but for the 11 years she had spent making herself small for the woman she might have been if she'd never taken her grandfather's test, for the sheer staggering loneliness of having been useful to a man who never once tried to know her. Then she wiped her face, and she got to work. Michael arrived at 6:15 that evening with 2 associates and 4 boxes, and by 7 the penthouse dining table was covered in the architecture of 40 years of buried history. Emily stood over it with her sleeves pushed up, and for the next several hours she stopped being a discarded wife entirely and became something Nathan Collins had never once seen, the granddaughter of Harold Anderson, reading a company the way her grandfather had taught her to read one fast and cold and total. "Start with the conversion," she said. Michael slid a document across the table. "This is the real one, the one in our vault, the emergency financing from 5 years ago that saved Collins' development. Nathan believes he took on a passive investor at a favorable rate. What he actually signed," Michael turned to the 4th page, "was a convertible instrument. The fund you control can convert its position into 51% of the company at any time on 60 days' notice at a fixed price set 5 years ago before the company tripled in value." Emily read it twice. "He never had this reviewed. He had a junior associate review it at a firm that no longer exists. The associate flagged the conversion clause." Michael's mouth twitched. "And Nathan overrode him because he was drowning and the money was in the room and he wanted to believe it was a gift. He signed it in an afternoon and never looked at it again. Emily, that clause has been sitting there for 5 years like a loaded gun on a shelf. Nobody's touched it because nobody knew it was loaded. Except me. Except you." Emily set the document down. "How long to exercise it?" If you file the conversion notice tomorrow morning, you become the controlling shareholder of Collins Development in 60 days. Legally, cleanly. There is nothing he can do to stop it, because there is nothing he can do to unsign a contract he signed in front of 2 witnesses and a notary. Michael paused. He won't even see it coming. The notice goes to the company's registered agent, not to Nathan personally. By the time it reaches his desk, the clock will already be running. Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Not yet." Michael looked up. "Emily, if I file tomorrow, I win a company." She shook her head slowly. "But I don't want to win a company, Michael. Nathan can keep his buildings and his gold letters and his little kingdom for all I care. That's not the wound. The wound is that he looked at me and decided I was nothing, and if I just quietly buy him out from behind a curtain, he'll never understand what he threw away. He'll tell himself he got unlucky. He'll tell himself the market turned." Her voice hardened. "I don't want him to think he got unlucky. I want him to understand." "Understand what?" "That every good thing in his life had my hand under it. That when he cried in that bathroom the night the Delgado deal died, the reason he was alive to cry was me. That the money that saved him 5 years ago was me. That the ground under his feet, the actual literal ground, has been me the entire time." Emily looked at the photograph on the mantel. "My grandfather said money doesn't reveal who a person is. It reveals who they always were. Well, I already know who Nathan always was. Now I want him to know it too." Michael studied her. "That's not a legal strategy, Emily. That's something else." "It's justice," Emily said. "It just doesn't have a case number yet." It was nearly 10 o'clock when they turned to Victoria. Michael's associate, a sharp young woman named Priya, who had spent the last several hours on a laptop in the corner, cleared her throat. "Miss Anderson, I found her. Victoria Hayes, 28, corporate associate at Bell Renwick. Cornell undergrad, Columbia Law. Made law review. On paper, she's exactly what she looks like, an ambitious young attorney on a partner track." Priya paused, but then I pulled her family. "And her father is David Hayes. Her grandfather," Priya looked up, "was Gerald Hayes." The room went still. "So it's true," Emily said quietly. "It's true, and there's more." Priya turned her laptop around. "David Hayes died 4 years ago. Bankruptcy twice. Lost the family home. Victoria was in law school when it happened, and I found something, a wrongful termination suit David filed in 2009, representing himself against a company that had fired him. In the complaint, he wrote a personal statement. It's 4 pages long, and most of it is legally irrelevant, but he couldn't help himself." Priya scrolled. Page 3. He writes, and I'm quoting, "My family was destroyed by Harold Anderson, who stole my father's company and left us with nothing, and I have spent my life trying to rebuild what he took, and I will not stop, and my daughter will not stop until the Anderson name answers for what it did." Nobody spoke. Emily read the line off the screen herself, slowly out loud, as if saying it might make it less real. "My daughter will not stop." "She was raised on it," Priya said softly. "The whole story. The theft, the ruin, the enemy with the name. Miss Anderson, she didn't stumble into your husband's life. She was aimed at it." Emily sat down. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she had been holding on to a smaller version of all this, a version where Victoria was just a clever, cold young woman who'd seen an opportunity in a rich man's boredom. That version was almost bearable. This one was not. This one meant that the betrayal in her living room that morning had been 40 years in the making. It meant that Gerald Hayes had reached across 4 decades and 2 graves to put his granddaughter in Emily's home, in Emily's marriage, wearing Emily's diamonds. "What does she know?" Emily asked finally. "That's what matters now. Nathan's a means to an end. So what's the end? What does she think she can do to me through him?" Priya and Michael exchanged a look. "That," Michael said, "is the part that changes everything, and I don't think you're going to like it." "Tell me anyway." Nathan's company files a quarterly disclosure. It's routine boilerplate, nobody reads it. But 3 months ago, the disclosure changed. Someone added a new line to the list of the company's material financial relationships, a single line buried on page 40. It references vaguely, without naming it, a legacy financing entity with a convertible position. Michael let that land. Emily, somebody found the conversion clause. Somebody who works inside Nathan's company with access to his real documents went looking for exactly what I found and found it 3 months ago. Victoria, Michael agreed. She's known for 3 months that there's a hidden investor who can seize the whole company. She's spent 3 months trying to figure out who it is. And she can't, because the ownership chain is buried under 50 years of your grandfather's shell structures, and it dead ends at a trust with no name on it. He leaned forward. But Emily, she knows the gun exists now. She's holding a company that can be taken away from underneath her at any moment by a person she can't identify. Do you understand what that means? Emily's mind was already 3 moves ahead. It means she's not trying to take Nathan's company. She's trying to take control of it before the mystery investor does. She married her way in so she'd be inside the walls when the gun goes off. And it means, Michael said, that the second you file that conversion notice, she'll know exactly who the mystery investor is. She'll know it's an Anderson. She'll know it's you. He paused. You'll be showing her your whole hand. And a woman who's spent her life planning her revenge on your family is not going to see it as a loss. She's going to see it as the moment she's been waiting for. The clock on the mantel read 10:20 when Emily's phone rang. She looked at the screen. It was Nathan. She let it ring twice the way she had that morning. Then she put it on speaker and set it on the table where everyone could hear. "Emily," Nathan said, and his voice was wrong. It had none of the smooth, magnanimous cruelty from the morning. It was tight. It was fast. "Emily, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me for once in your life." "Once in my life," Emily repeated. "All right, Nathan, ask." "Did you know?" Emily kept her voice perfectly level. "Did I know what... There's an investor in my company, a convertible position, some legacy financing thing from 5 years ago. My head of legal just brought it to me an hour ago, and she's white as a sheet. Emily, she's telling me somebody can convert into a controlling stake, and I don't..." He stopped. She could hear him breathing. "I need to know if you knew about this, when we were married. Because if you knew, and you didn't tell me..." Emily looked across the table at Michael, who had gone very still, because they had both just understood the same thing at the same time. Victoria had told Nathan, "Tonight, this evening." Sometime in the last hour, Victoria Hayes had walked into her new life with Nathan Collins and pointed at the loaded gun on the shelf, the gun she'd found 3 months ago, and said nothing about and let him discover it in a panic. She had chosen this moment, the very day of the divorce, to detonate the fear, which meant Victoria was making her move. Whatever her plan was, it was starting now. "Nathan," Emily said slowly, "who told you about the convertible position?" "That doesn't matter. Was it Victoria?" Silence on the line. "It was Victoria," Emily said. "Your head of legal didn't find it. Victoria pointed her to it. Am I right?" "She was trying to help me, Emily. She's an attorney. She was reviewing my structure. Nathan's voice climbed. "Why does it matter who found it? What matters is that there's a person who can take everything from me, and I don't know who it is, and I'm asking you, I'm begging you if you know anything." And Emily understood, listening to the panic crack his voice open, that Nathan had spent the entire day believing he was the one holding all the power. And now 12 hours later, he was a frightened man begging his ex-wife for help against a threat he couldn't see standing next to a woman who was the threat, and he didn't know it. He didn't know anything. He'd never known anything. "Nathan," Emily said gently, "I want you to listen to me very carefully, because I'm only going to say this once, and I'm saying it as the last honest thing I will ever owe you." She paused. "You need to be very careful about who you trust right now." "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means the woman standing next to you is not who you think she is." She heard him laugh ugly and disbelieving. "Oh, that's really something, Emily. You're jealous, even now, even after everything. You're going to try to poison me against Victoria because you can't stand that I'm not jealous, Nathan. I stopped being able to be jealous about you around the 8th year." Emily's voice didn't rise. "I'm telling you that the person who found that convertible position isn't trying to save you from it. Ask yourself one question, just one, and then I'll let you go. If Victoria found this 3 months ago..." She watched the realization not land, watched Nathan's silence stay confused instead of horrified. "Why is she only telling you tonight? On the day of our divorce, why did she wait until she was legally inside your life to let you find the gun?" The line went completely quiet. For one moment, one single moment, Emily thought she'd reached him. She thought some old, buried, competent part of Nathan Collins, the part that had once built something out of nothing, might wake up and do the math. Then Victoria's voice came through the phone, close to the receiver, cold, amused. "Hang up on her, Nathan." And he did. The call died. Emily set the phone down. The penthouse was silent, except for the ticking of the clock, and it was 10:34, and Emily Anderson sat at a table covered in 40 years of her family's buried war, and understood that she had just heard her enemy take control of the room. "She was standing right there," Michael said quietly, "the whole time, listening." Of course she was. Emily's hands were very steady. She let him call me. She wanted to hear whether I'd tell him the truth. She was measuring me. Emily looked at the phone. "And now she knows I know something. She heard me warn him. She heard me get close." A slow breath. "The game just changed, Michael. She knows I'm not the woman she thought I was. Discarded wives don't warn the husbands who threw them away." "So what do we do?" Emily stood. She walked to the window, to the city spread out below her, all of it lit and enormous and indifferent. The same city that had watched her be small for 12 years and had no idea that the small woman had just come home to a penthouse her grandfather had kept waiting for over a decade. "She thinks she has 3 months head start," Emily said. "She thinks she found the gun and I don't even know it exists. She thinks she's inside the walls and I'm outside them." Emily turned around. "She's wrong about all three." "Emily, if she's as good as we think she is..." "She's very good," Emily agreed. "She's smart and she's patient, and she's been planning this since she was old enough to understand the word Anderson. I'm not going to underestimate her the way Nathan underestimated me. That's exactly the mistake that got him here." Emily crossed back to the table. "But she has one weakness, Michael, and it's the same weakness her grandfather had, and it's the same weakness that killed him." "What's that?" "She thinks this is about the company." Emily laid her hand flat on the conversion document. "She thinks the prize is the buildings and the money and the controlling stake. She's spent her whole life believing that if she can just get back what Gerald lost, the wound will close." Emily's voice softened almost to pity. "But the wound doesn't close, Michael. I've had a very educational day on that subject. You don't heal by taking someone else's things. You heal by becoming someone who doesn't need them. And Victoria has no idea how to do that, because nobody ever taught her, because all anyone ever taught her was the debt." Emily shook her head. "She's going to spend everything to win a company, and I'm going to let her think she's winning it, right up until the moment she understands that it was never the prize." Michael was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between awe and worry. "You sound like him," he said finally. "Harold, when you talk like that, you sound exactly like him." Emily looked at the photograph on the mantel at her grandfather squinting into the sun in front of his mill. "Good," she said. They worked until well past midnight. When Michael and the associates finally packed up and left, it was 12:50, and Emily stood alone in the penthouse for a long time, too awake to sleep, her mind moving across the board again and again. At 1:15, her phone buzzed. Not a call. A text. From a number she didn't recognize. She looked at it for a moment before she opened it, because some instinct told her that this was it. This was the real beginning. This was the enemy stepping out from behind Nathan at last to speak to her directly. She opened it. The text was 4 words long. "I know who you are." Emily stood very still. Then a second message came through, and this one was longer, and this one confirmed everything. "Harold Anderson's granddaughter. It took me an hour after you warned Nathan, but I found the trust and I found the name behind it, and I know exactly who's been holding the gun over my head for 3 months. I have to say, I'm impressed. 12 years pretending to be nobody. Your grandfather would be proud. He was very good at pretending too, right up until he stole everything my family had." Emily read it twice. Then a third message arrived. "You have something I want, Emily. And I have something you don't know you've lost yet. So, before you file that conversion notice and think you've won, because I know you can, I know the terms I've known for 3 months, you should probably ask yourself one question. And then the fourth and final message came through at 1:19 in the morning, and Emily read it standing alone in her grandfather's penthouse, and for the first time all day, through the betrayal, through the necklace, through the divorce, through the whole long revelation of who Nathan had always been, she felt something cold move down her spine. "You should ask yourself," Victoria had written, "why your grandfather really structured everything to be invisible. Because it wasn't to protect you, Emily. He told you that story so you'd never go looking for the real one. I have documents about what actually happened in 1986. And when you read them, you're going to understand that the reason Harold Anderson hid you from the world for your entire life isn't that he was afraid people wouldn't love you. It's that he was afraid you'd find out what he did. Come find me when you're ready to know the truth about your own family. I'll be waiting. I've been waiting my whole life." Emily lowered the phone. Across the room, her grandfather squinted out of his photograph into a sun that had set 40 years ago, young and certain and holding a secret she had never once thought to question. Because he had told her a story, a beautiful story, a story about love and tests and finding the people who would care for her when she had nothing. And she had believed every word of it. For 11 years she had built her entire life on that story. And now a woman who hated her family more than anyone alive was telling her the story was a lie. Emily walked slowly to the mantel. She picked up the photograph. She looked into the young face of the man who had raised her, who had died holding her hand, who had left her a fortune and a penthouse, and a caretaker who waited 11 years, and who had also apparently left her a secret buried so deep that his enemy's granddaughter had spent her whole life trying to dig it up. "What did you do?" Emily whispered to the photograph. "What did you really do?" The man in the picture didn't answer. He just kept squinting into the light, the way he had that morning decades ago, in front of a mill he was about to turn into an empire that a young man named Gerald Hayes had helped him build, and that Gerald Hayes had 40 years later died swearing had been stolen from him. Stolen. Emily set the photograph down. And in the silence of the penthouse at 1:24 in the morning, on the longest day of her life, she understood that the war she thought she'd just entered was not the war she was actually in. She'd spent the whole day believing the question was whether she would take Nathan's company or let him keep it. She'd believed the question was Victoria and Nathan, and a marriage that had ended on a rainy Monday. But those weren't the real questions. Those were just the surface. The real question was the one her grandfather had left buried under 50 years of shell companies and beautiful stories and a dying man's careful, loving lies. The real question was what happened in 1986. And Emily Anderson realized, standing alone in a home built on secrets, that before this was over, before she could face Victoria, before she could deal with Nathan, before she could turn on the light and become who she was going to have to find out whether the grandfather she had loved her entire life had been the victim of the story or the villain of it. Emily didn't sleep. She sat at her grandfather's desk until the sky over the city turned from black to the color of old iron, and she read the folder from the first page to the last, and then she read it again, and the more she read, the less she understood, because everything her grandfather had written pointed to one truth, while everything Victoria had promised pointed to another, and Emily had no way of knowing which of two dead men had been lying. At 6:40 in the morning, she called Michael. "I need the 1986 files," she said. "The originals, not your memory of them. The actual documents. Everything my grandfather kept about Gerald Hayes and the transfer and how it fell apart." There was a silence on the line, and then Michael said carefully, "Emily, what happened last night?" "Victoria texted me at 1 in the morning. She knows who I am. She figured out the trust an hour after I warned Nathan." Emily rubbed her eyes. "And she told me my grandfather lied to me, about all of it, about why he hid me. She says she has documents about what really happened in 1986, and she says that when I read them, I'll understand that Harold wasn't the victim, that he was the thief." Michael didn't answer right away, and it was the not answering that made Emily's stomach drop. "Michael," she said slowly, "you went quiet. In 30 years, you've never once gone quiet when I needed you to tell me something. So I'm going to ask you, and I need the real answer. Is there any chance she's telling the truth?" She heard him exhale. "Emily," he said, I need to come see you. This isn't a conversation for the phone. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you at 6 in the morning. A pause. I'll be there in an hour. And I'm bringing something I should have shown you 11 years ago when your grandfather died and didn't because he made me promise I wouldn't unless you asked. And you never asked Emily. In 11 years, you never once asked what really happened. You just believed him. The line went dead. Emily sat with the phone in her hand and understood for the second time in 12 hours that a version of her life she had believed to be solid was in fact made of paper, and someone was about to hold a match to it. Michael arrived at 7:50 with a single leather portfolio and a face that had aged since the night before. He didn't sit. He stood in the middle of the penthouse and looked at Emily for a long moment, and then he said the thing he'd been carrying for 11 years. Your grandfather did take the company from Gerald Hayes, Michael said. That part is true. Gerald didn't steal it first. That's the story Harold told, and it's the story I told you, and it's the story in the files I was going to bring you tomorrow. But it isn't what happened. Emily set down her coffee very slowly. Then what happened? They built the first 3 funds together as partners 50-50. That's real. And in 1986, the company was about to make the deal that changed everything. The deal that turned Anderson from a small operation into the empire you're going to inherit. And 2 weeks before it closed, Gerald Hayes had a stroke. A stroke. He was 44. He survived, but he was out for months. Couldn't speak, couldn't sign, couldn't work. Michael's voice was heavy. And your grandfather made a decision. He had a deal that would make both of them richer than they'd ever dreamed. And he had a partner who couldn't participate. And he had a choice between waiting, maybe losing the deal, maybe losing everything, or restructuring the partnership while Gerald was incapacitated so that he could close it alone. Michael looked at her. He restructured it, Emily. He had lawyers draw up a transfer that moved controlling interest to himself. He said it was temporary. He said he'd give it back when Gerald recovered. And he didn't. And he didn't. Michael's jaw tightened. By the time Gerald could speak again, the deal had closed. The company was worth 10 times what it had been, and Harold had convinced himself that Gerald had never really been an equal partner anyway, that he'd carried Gerald for years, that the company was really his all along, and the partnership had just been sentiment. A pause. People are very good at rewriting the story that lets them keep what they took. Your grandfather was the best I ever saw. Emily's hands had gone cold. So the forgery, the story you told me about Gerald forging Harold's signature, there was a forged signature, Michael said quietly. But it wasn't Gerald's forgery. It was Harold's. He forged Gerald's consent to the transfer while Gerald was in a hospital bed unable to speak, and then when Gerald recovered and tried to fight it, Harold got there first. He went to the papers, to the courts, to every investor in the city, and he told them Gerald was a desperate, dishonest man trying to steal a company he'd already been bought out of. And people believed Harold because Harold had the money and the deal and the power, and Gerald had a slur in his speech from the stroke and no way to prove what had really happened. Michael's voice cracked. He didn't just take the company, Emily. He took the truth. He made Gerald the villain of the story Gerald was actually the victim of, and he spent the rest of his life making sure nobody ever looked close enough to see it. The penthouse was very quiet. Emily walked to the window. Below her, the city was waking up, and somewhere in it, 3 buildings still carried Nathan's name in gold, and somewhere in it, a young woman named Victoria Hayes was waiting for Emily to learn exactly what Emily had just learned. You knew this, Emily said. For 11 years. You knew, and you told me the other story. He made me promise. Michael's voice was raw. On his deathbed. He said you'd inherit a fortune, and he didn't want you to inherit the guilt with it. He said let her have the money clean. Let her think it was honest. She'll do more good with it than I ever did. And she can't do that good if she spends her life ashamed of where it came from. Michael looked at her, and his eyes were wet. I hated him for asking me. And I loved you too much to break the promise. So I kept it, and I've regretted it every single day. Emily pressed her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes. Everything her grandfather had told her, the beautiful story about hiding her from the world so she could find real love, the test, the flash of light developing the photograph of a person's character, all of it she understood now had been true. He had believed every word of it. He'd meant it. And it had also been a cage he built to keep her from ever asking the one question that would have led her here. He hadn't hidden her fortune only to protect her from false love. He'd hidden it to protect himself from her judgment. "He was afraid of me," Emily said softly. "That's what Victoria meant. He wasn't afraid people wouldn't love me. He was afraid I'd find out what he did. He built the whole invisible life so I'd never have a reason to go digging, so I'd never meet anyone who knew the real story, so I'd grow up loving a man who—" Her voice broke. "Who stole another man's entire life and then let that man's family fall into ruin and never once looked back." "Emily, David Hayes died in bankruptcy," Emily said, and her voice was rising now, not in anger, but in something worse, in horror. "Gerald died disgraced. Their whole family was destroyed, Michael, generation after generation, because my grandfather took what was theirs and then made them into liars, so no one would ever give it back. And I inherited it. I inherited all of it. The money that ruined them is the money I've been sitting on my whole life." She turned from the window. "Victoria grew up poor because I grew up rich. It's the same fortune. It was only ever one fortune, and my family took the half that belonged to hers." Michael didn't argue. He couldn't. It was true. At 8:30, Emily's phone rang. Victoria. Emily looked at the screen for a long moment. Then she answered, and she put it on speaker, and she set it on the desk. "You read the files," Victoria said. "It wasn't a question. I can hear it in the way you're breathing. You know now." "I know," Emily said. "Then you understand." Victoria's voice was steady, almost gentle, and that was the most unsettling thing about it. She didn't sound triumphant. She sounded like a person who had waited her whole life to be believed and was finally being believed. "You understand that everything you have is ours, that the buildings, the trust, the $18 billion, the penthouse you're standing in right now, all of it grew out of a company my grandfather built and yours stole while my grandfather was lying in a hospital bed. You understand that I'm not the villain of this story, Emily. I'm the debt your grandfather never paid." Emily closed her eyes. "What do you want, Victoria?" "I want what should have been mine." No hesitation. "I want the company, Nathan's company, which is really Anderson land, which is really Hayes land underneath that. I want the conversion instrument. I want you to sign your controlling position over to me instead of exercising it yourself. And in exchange, I keep the 1986 files buried, and your grandfather stays a hero. And you get to walk away with your billions and your clean conscience and your beautiful story about the man who tested you for love." A pause. "You get to keep the lie, Emily. That's my offer. You keep the lie, and I take one company out of an empire. After 40 years, I think one company is a very reasonable price for silence. Don't you?" Emily opened her eyes, and here was the moment she understood it, as it arrived the moment Victoria had been building toward since 1 in the morning, because it was a good offer. It was from a certain angle, a merciful offer. Emily could give Victoria a single company, protect her grandfather's memory, keep the fortune, and make the whole thing disappear. Nathan would lose his business, which he deserved. Victoria would get her family's due, or a piece of it. And no one would ever have to know that Harold Anderson had been a thief. It was the easy path, and Emily heard her grandfather's voice in her head, clear as if he were standing in the room. "Money doesn't reveal who a person is. It reveals who they always were." He'd said it as wisdom. He'd meant it as confession. "No," Emily said. The line went quiet. "No," Victoria repeated, and for the first time there was something uncertain in her voice. "Emily, I'm offering you everything. I'm offering to protect the one thing you have left, the memory of a man you loved. I'm offering to let you keep believing your own life. Why would you say no? Because you got one thing wrong." Emily's voice was very calm now, calmer than it had been in 12 hours. "You think the thing I want to protect is the lie. You think I'll pay any price to keep believing my grandfather was a good man." She shook her head. "But I stopped being able to believe that about half an hour ago, Victoria, and I'm not going to spend the rest of my life protecting a story I know is false. That's the whole trap. That's exactly the cage he built for me, and I'm not going to climb back into it just because you're offering to lock the door gently." Then what? You don't want a piece of it quietly, Emily said. You want the truth known. I heard it in your voice a second ago, the same thing Michael heard in mine. You've spent your whole life carrying a story nobody believed, and the thing you actually want under the company, under the money, under all of it, is for the world to finally know that Gerald Hayes wasn't a thief, that your family was robbed, that you were right. Emily leaned toward the phone. And I can't give you that by signing a company over to you in secret. A secret settlement just buries it deeper. It makes you complicit in the same silence that's been crushing your family for 40 years. Victoria didn't answer. So here's what I'm going to do instead, Emily said, and it's going to cost me a great deal more than one company. Emily, Michael started alarmed. Emily held up her hand. I'm going to make it public, Emily said into the phone. All of it. The 1986 files, the forged consent, what my grandfather did to yours. I'm going to stand in front of the world, and I'm going to say that the Anderson fortune was built on a theft, and that Gerald Hayes was not a thief, but a robbed man, and that his family was destroyed by mine. I'm going to correct the record, Victoria. Not quietly, not in a settlement nobody reads, publicly, on the record, forever. The silence on the line was absolute. You're lying, Victoria said finally, and her voice had changed completely. The control was gone. Nobody does that. Nobody torches their own name. Nobody gives up the story that protects their whole fortune. You're trying to trick me. Somehow this is a game. It's not a game. Emily's voice was steady. I've spent one day learning who the people around me really are. Nathan, my grandfather. And I've spent one day deciding who I'm going to be. And I've decided I'm not going to be the granddaughter who kept the secret. She paused. I don't want your forgiveness, Victoria. I don't deserve it, and I'm not going to ask for it. But I'm not going to keep profiting from the lie that ruined your family, and I'm not going to buy your silence because your silence is the thing that's been killing you your whole life. Stop. Your grandfather was robbed. Your father died believing no one would ever know. And you grew up carrying a truth so heavy it turned your whole life into a revenge you never even got to want because it was handed to you before you could choose it. Emily's voice had gone very gentle. I can't give you back the years. I can't give you back your father, but I can give you back the truth, in public, with my name on it. And I can give you back the money that was stolen, not one company, Victoria. Your family's half, all of it, because it was never mine to keep. And on the other end of the line, a woman who had spent 28 years learning how to be an enemy, who had built her whole identity around a debt no one would acknowledge, who had walked into Emily's home a day ago and taken the diamonds off her neck without flinching. That woman made a sound Emily had not expected. She started to cry. Not the controlled tears of a negotiation. Not a tactic. It was an ugly, broken, gasping sound, the sound of a person whose entire framework has just collapsed because Victoria Hayes had prepared her whole life for war, for Emily to fight her to deny it, to bury it, to protect the Anderson name the way every Anderson before her had, and she had no idea, none at all, what to do with an enemy who simply agreed. You can't, Victoria managed. You can't just, I've spent my whole life, my father died. You don't get to just say yes. You don't get to just make it right. It's not supposed to be that easy. It's not easy, Emily said quietly. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. It's just also right. A pause. Those aren't the same thing, Victoria. I'm learning that today, too. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of a woman crying 2 miles away, and Emily let her and Michael stood frozen in the middle of the room, and the city outside kept moving, indifferent, enormous, unaware that in a penthouse it had never noticed a 40-year-old wound had just been told for the first time that it was allowed to close. And then Victoria stopped crying. And when she spoke again, her voice was different. It was smaller. It was younger. It was Emily realized the first time she'd heard Victoria's real voice, the one underneath the corporate attorney, and the cold smile and the stolen necklace. There's something you don't know, Victoria said. Tell me. I didn't do this alone. Victoria's voice shook. The plan getting to Nathan, finding the conversion clause targeting the company, I didn't come up with it. I was 24 when someone came to me, someone who'd spent years researching your family, someone who knew about the 1986 files before I did, who gave me the documents, who told me how to find Nathan, who taught me everything about the Anderson structure. She stopped. I thought I was doing it for my grandfather, for my father. I thought it was mine, but it wasn't. It was theirs. They just needed a Hayes to be the face of it because a Hayes had a reason. A Hayes had a story that would hold up. Emily's spine went cold. Who, Victoria? I can't. Who came to you? You already know one of them. Victoria's voice dropped to almost nothing. You've known him for 12 years. You wrote his business plans at 2 a.m. You saved him 5 years ago, and he never knew it was you. The room tilted. Nathan, Emily whispered. He's not what you think either, Victoria said. He never was. The struggling man you met in the coffee shop, the holes in his shoes, the dream too big for his voice. Emily, that was aimed at you. From the beginning. Somebody knew who you really were. Somebody knew Harold Anderson had a hidden granddaughter sitting on $18 billion, and somebody sent a charming, broke, ambitious man to a coffee shop you went to every morning to make you fall in love with a man who had nothing. Victoria's voice broke again. You didn't fail your grandfather's test, Emily. You never got to take it. The whole thing was rigged before you ordered your first cup of coffee. Nathan knew who you were on the day you met. He's known for 12 years. And the person who sent him, the person who's been running all of it, me and Nathan both, is the person you're going to have to face now. Because I'm out. I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. But he isn't going to stop. And he's a great deal more dangerous than a woman crying on the phone or a man who left you for an upgrade. Yenbisi Ani-san. Emily could barely breathe. Victoria. Her voice was almost gone. Who is he? And 2 miles away in a penthouse that had been Nathan's until yesterday, standing in the wreckage of a plan 40 years in the making, Victoria Hayes said the name. And it was a name Emily knew. It was a name Emily had trusted. It was a name that had been in the room with her on the phone with her in her life for the last 11 years, and it landed in Emily's chest with the force of everything else that day combined, because it meant that the one person she had believed was on her side had never been on her side at all. Emily turned very slowly and looked across the penthouse at Michael Reynolds, who had gone completely perfectly still, who was no longer meeting her eyes. The name hung in the air, and Michael Reynolds did not deny it. That was the thing Emily would remember later when she tried to reconstruct the exact moment the last floor of her life fell out from under her. He didn't deny it. He didn't laugh, didn't scoff, didn't say Victoria was lying to turn her, didn't do any of the 10 things an innocent man would have done in the first half second. He just stood there in the middle of the penthouse, an old man in a good suit, and he lowered his eyes to the floor like a man setting down a weight he'd carried too long. Hang up the phone, Emily, Michael said quietly. Emily did not hang up the phone. Victoria? She said, her eyes locked on Michael. Stay on the line. Emily, Michael started, you've been my grandfather's attorney for 30 years. Emily's voice was very soft and very steady, which was worse somehow than if she'd been screaming. You held my hand at his funeral. You moved my money for 11 years. You came here this morning and told me the truth about 1986 with tears in your eyes, and I believed every word because you're the one person in the entire world I never once thought to doubt. She took a step toward him. So tell me she's lying, Michael. Tell me right now. Look at me and tell me Victoria Hayes is lying, and I'll believe you. I'll believe you over her. That's how much I trusted you, even now, even after everything today. Tell me she's lying. Michael raised his eyes, and he couldn't do it. I'm not going to lie to you again, he said. I've done enough of that. The phone on the desk was silent. Even Victoria had stopped breathing. Emily felt the room go very far away. How long? Emily. How long, Michael? From the beginning. His voice was hollow. From before the beginning. From before you were even born. He walked slowly to the chair by the window and sat down heavily, an old man's collapse, and he put his face in his hands for a moment before he looked up at her. You want the truth. All right. You're going to get it, and it's going to be worse than anything Victoria told you, because Victoria only knows the middle of the story. She doesn't know how it started. Only I know that. He took a breath. It started with Gerald Hayes. And me. and a promise I made to a dying man that wasn't your grandfather." Emily didn't move. "I told you Harold and Gerald built the first 3 funds together," Michael said. "That's true. What I didn't tell you is that I was there. I was young then, barely out of law school, and I worked for both of them. I drafted those first partnership agreements. And I watched what your grandfather did in 1986, the stroke, the forged consent, the theft, all of it. I watched it happen in real time from the inside because I was the lawyer who drew up the papers." His voice cracked. "Harold made me forge Gerald's signature, Emily. Me. I was 29 years old and terrified, and he was the most powerful man I'd ever met, and he told me it was temporary, and I signed a dead man's name to a document that stole his life. Except he wasn't dead yet. That came later." "Michael." "When Gerald recovered enough to understand what had happened, he came to me." Michael's hands were shaking. "Not to Harold, to me. Because I was the one who'd done it, and he didn't threaten me, Emily. That's the part that's haunted me for 40 years. He didn't scream or sue or curse me. He just looked at me, this broken man with half his face still frozen from the stroke, and he said, 'You were the only honest one in that room, and you did this. Why?' And I didn't have an answer. I was a coward. I chose the powerful man over the honest one, and I've had 40 years to understand exactly what that made me." "So you helped Victoria," Emily said slowly, out of guilt. "No." Michael shook his head. "That's what I told myself for a long time, that it was penance. But it wasn't penance, Emily. Penance would have been confessing when your grandfather was alive. Penance would have been giving the Hayes family back what was theirs, while it could still have saved David from bankruptcy, saved him from dying disgraced. I didn't do any of that." His voice dropped. "I waited until Harold was safely dead. And then I went and found his granddaughter, and I gave her the files, and I aimed her at you. That's not penance. That's cowardice wearing penance's coat. I couldn't face Harold. So I built a plan to punish his fortune after he was gone, and I let a 24-year-old girl carry the weight of it because I was too much of a coward to carry it myself." Emily's chest ached. "And Nathan—" Michael was quiet for a long moment. "That was the worst thing I ever did," he said finally. "Worse than the forgery. Worse than all of it." He looked at her, and his eyes were wet and old and full of a shame so complete it had eaten 40 years of his life. "You have to understand, I knew everything about you, Emily. I managed the trust. I knew about your grandfather's plan, the invisible life, the test. I knew you were going out into the world to find a man who'd love you when you had nothing. And I thought—" His voice broke. "God forgive me. I thought, what if the man who finds her is one of mine? What if the man she falls in love with is a man I put there? Then I'd have a hand inside her life, a way to move the pieces, a way to eventually reach the fortune." Emily could barely speak. "You sent Nathan." "I found Nathan Collins when he was 26 and broke and hungry and willing to do anything," Michael said. "And I told him about a woman who went to a certain coffee shop every morning. I told him she was worth more than he could imagine, and that if he could make her love him, I'd make him rich. I taught him how to be poor in a way that would move you, the holes in the shoes, the dream too big for his voice. I coached him Emily, every detail. The struggling man you fell in love with was a character I wrote and Nathan performed." He put his face back in his hands. "You never took your grandfather's test. Victoria was right about that. The test was rigged before it started, because I rigged it." The penthouse was silent, except for the small, terrible sound of an old man weeping, and Emily Anderson stood in the center of it and felt something she had not felt all day, not through the necklace, not through the divorce, not through the discovery of her grandfather's theft. She felt the ground of her entire life dissolve. Because if this was true, then nothing she had believed about her own past was real. Not the love, not the struggle, not the 12 years, not the 2 a.m. business plans or the cold rice or the crying through the bathroom door. All of it had been theater. She had spent 12 years pouring her whole self into a man who had been hired to receive it. "Say something," Michael whispered. "Please, scream at me, hit me, anything." But Emily didn't scream. She walked to the window and she stood there with her back to him, and she was quiet for a long, long time. And when she finally spoke, her voice was not what Michael expected, and it was not what Victoria, still listening silent, 2 miles away, expected either. "You know what the strangest part is?" Emily said softly. "I'm not surprised. Somewhere underneath, I think I've known for years that Nathan never really saw me. I told myself it was distance or work or the money changing him. But it was simpler than that. He never saw me because there was never a version of him that was looking. He was always performing. I just didn't know the audience was me. She turned around. But here's what you got wrong, Michael. All of you. You and Nathan and Victoria and even my grandfather. You all built your whole plans on the same mistake. What mistake? You all thought the thing that mattered was the money. Emily's eyes were dry now and clear, and there was something in them that made Michael sit up. My grandfather hid me to protect his secret. You aimed a man at me to reach the fortune. Victoria came for the company. Nathan performed poverty for a payout. Every single one of you looked at me and saw $18 billion wearing a woman's face. Nobody, not one person in 40 years, ever once looked at me and saw a person who might figure it out. She took a step toward him. You've all been playing chess with my life, and it never occurred to any of you that the piece you were moving around the board might be the best player at the table. Michael stared at her. You confessed, Emily went on, because you thought I'd be destroyed by it. You thought the truth would break me the way it broke Gerald, the way it broke David. You wanted absolution, and you thought a broken woman would give it to you, because a broken woman is grateful for any hand that reaches down. Her voice sharpened. But I'm not broken, Michael. I've been getting less broken by the hour since yesterday morning, and I'm not going to give you absolution. What I'm going to give you is a choice. A choice? You spent 40 years too cowardly to tell the truth while it could cost you anything. Harold's dead, Gerald's dead, David's dead. You waited until the truth was safe. Emily's voice was iron now. Well, it's not safe anymore, because I'm about to make all of it public, the theft, the forgery, the rigged marriage, your part in every bit of it. Your name, Michael, in the light. Everything you did. She watched him go pale. That's what's coming. The only choice you have left is whether you stand next to me when I do it and tell the truth with your own mouth for once in your life, or whether you run and let me tell it about you instead. Emily, it would end me. My firm, my license, my... Yes, Emily said. It would. 40 years too late, the truth would finally cost you something. That's not a punishment, Michael. That's just the bill. It's been sitting on the table this whole time. Somebody was always going to have to pay it. She held his eyes. The only question is whether you pay it standing up or lying down. For a long moment, Michael Reynolds looked at her. This woman he had watched grow up, whose money he had moved, whose life he had rigged, whose trust he had spent, and something moved across his ruined old face that Emily had never seen there before. It was relief. All right, he whispered. All right, standing up. I'll tell it, all of it, with my name on it. He wiped his face. I've wanted to be caught for 40 years, Emily. I just never had the courage to catch myself. Thank you for doing it for me. Don't thank me, Emily said. I'm not doing it for you. The voice came from the phone, then small and shaking. Emily. It was Victoria. She'd heard all of it. I have to tell you something, and then I'm going to hang up, and you're never going to hear from me again, because I don't deserve to be part of whatever you build after this. A breath. You were supposed to be my enemy. My whole life you were the enemy, the Anderson girl, the heir to the fortune that ruined us. I hated you before I ever met you. Her voice cracked. And then I walked into your apartment yesterday and took the necklace off your neck, and you smiled at me, and I didn't understand it. I've spent 24 hours not understanding it, but I understand it now. You smiled because you already knew you weren't going to become us. You weren't going to let the wound turn you into what it turned my father into, what it turned Michael into, what it would have turned me into. A long pause. You're the first Anderson who ever chose to be something other than the thing the money makes people. And I hate that it took losing to see it, but I see it. The line went dead. Emily set the phone down. By noon, the plan was in motion, and it moved with a speed that surprised even Emily, because it turned out that when you stop protecting a secret, everything gets faster. Michael made calls. Priya assembled the 1986 files into a record that could survive scrutiny. And Emily, who had spent 11 years being invisible, began deliberately, carefully, irreversibly to become visible. But there was still Nathan. He called at 2:40 in the afternoon, and this time Emily answered on the first ring because she wanted to hear it the exact moment the performance ended. Emily, Nathan said, and his voice had the smooth, false warmth she now recognized as the sound of a man reading from a script. "I've been thinking. About us. About everything. I made a terrible mistake and Michael told me," Emily said. Silence. 12 years, Nathan. The coffee shop, the shoes, the dream too big for your voice. Her voice was calm, almost curious. "Michael wrote all of it, and you performed it, for 12 years. So you can stop now. The show's over. There's no audience anymore." The silence stretched so long she thought he'd hung up. Then Nathan Collins laughed, a low, ugly, defeated sound, and when he spoke again, the warmth was gone, and what was underneath it was so cold that Emily understood finally that she had never once heard his real voice either. "So he told you," Nathan said. "The old coward finally cracked. I always knew he would." A pause. "You want to know the funny part, Emily? The part that's going to keep you up at night? 12 years I performed being poor for you. 12 years I said the lines Michael wrote, and you never noticed, not once. You want to know why?" His voice dropped. "Because you wanted the story so badly. You were so desperate to be loved for nothing that you never once checked whether the love was real. I didn't fool you, Emily. You fooled yourself. I just showed up." The words landed exactly where he'd aimed them, in the softest, oldest place in her, the little girl who'd been told by a dying man that she'd never know if anyone loved her, and Emily waited for them to hurt. They didn't. "You're right," she said quietly. "I did want it. I wanted it so badly I didn't look. That's true, and it's the truest thing you've ever said to me, and I'm going to carry it for a long time." She took a breath. "But here's what you don't understand, Nathan, because you've never understood anything about me. Wanting to be loved isn't the weakness. Wanting to be loved is the only thing in this whole story that was ever real. Everybody else in it wanted money. Gerald wanted his company. My grandfather wanted to keep it. Michael wanted absolution. Victoria wanted revenge. You wanted a payout." Her voice steadied. "I just wanted to be loved, and out of every single person who touched my life, I'm the only one who wanted something that wasn't about winning. So you can call that foolish if you want, but I'd rather be the fool who wanted love than any one of you who wanted the money. At least my hunger was human." Nathan didn't answer. "Here's what's going to happen now," Emily said. "In 60 days, I'm going to exercise the conversion clause, and I'm going to own your company, all of it, every building with your name in gold. But I'm not going to keep it, Nathan. I'm going to give it away, because it was never yours, and it was never mine. It grew out of stolen ground, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life giving stolen things back." A pause. "And you're going to lose everything. Not because I'm punishing you, because you never actually built anything. You performed a man who built things. And when the performance ends, there's nothing underneath. There was never anything underneath. That's the difference between us that Michael missed, that Victoria missed, that even my grandfather missed. You were all hollow, and I was the only one who was real." "You think you've won," Nathan said, but his voice had cracked, and the coldness had gone out of it, and underneath it now was fear, real fear, the first real thing he'd shown her in 12 years. "No," Emily said. "I don't think I've won. There's no winning this. 4 people are dead and a family was destroyed, and I lost 12 years to a lie. Nobody won anything, Nathan. But I'm going to do the one thing none of you had the courage to do." Her voice was very quiet now and very certain. "I'm going to tell the truth, and I'm going to give it all back. And then I'm going to find out for the first time in my entire life who I am when I'm not a fortune wearing a woman's face." She hung up. And for a moment, she just stood there in her grandfather's penthouse, holding a phone that had gone silent, surrounded by the wreckage of every story she'd ever believed. Then Priya spoke gently from the corner. "Miss Anderson, there's one more thing. Something I found this morning and didn't know how to bring up." She turned her laptop around. "The trust that holds the Hayes family's original, half the half your grandfather took. It was never fully absorbed. There's a mechanism. Harold buried it deep, but it's there. A provision that would let a controlling Anderson return the Hayes portion to the Hayes heirs at any time. He built the door, Miss Anderson, 50 years ago. He built a door to give it back, and then he made sure no one would ever find it." Priya looked up. I think part of him wanted someone to. Someday somebody with the courage he didn't have. Emily walked slowly to the mantel and picked up the photograph of her grandfather, young, squinting into the sun in front of his mill, a whole future of theft and empire and secrets ahead of him. "He built the door," she said softly. "He built the door," Priya confirmed. And Emily understood at last the final shape of the thing. Her grandfather had done a terrible thing and spent his life hiding it. But some small, buried, honest part of him, the part that told her be brave on a birthday card, the part that made her promise to find real love, that part had built a door and hidden it and waited 50 years for a granddaughter with the courage to open it. He couldn't undo it himself. He was too much the man the money made. But he'd made her, and he'd hidden a door, and he'd hoped. Emily set the photograph down. She looked at Priya and at Michael and out the window at the enormous, indifferent city that had watched her be small for 12 years and had no idea what she was about to do. "Open it," Emily said. "Open the door. Give the Hayes family back everything that was theirs, all of it. And then get me a room and a microphone and every reporter in this city." She squared her shoulders. "It's time to turn on the light." The room they found her was a hotel ballroom 11 blocks from the building where Nathan's name still hung in gold, and by 9 o'clock the next morning it was full. Emily had not expected it to be full. She'd told Priya to invite every reporter in the city, and she'd assumed most of them would ignore a summons from a woman none of them had ever heard of. But that was the old thinking, the invisible woman thinking, and Emily was already shedding it. Because the moment Michael's people released 3 words to the financial press the night before Anderson Legacy Holdings, every business reporter in New York understood that something enormous was about to happen, even if none of them knew what. They knew the name, they'd just never had a face to attach to it. At 9:15, Emily Anderson gave them one. She walked to the front of the room in a plain dark suit, no jewelry, no notes, and she stood at the microphone and looked out at 100 faces waiting to find out who she was, and she felt her grandfather's ghost standing at her shoulder, and she began. "My name is Emily Anderson," she said. "I'm the granddaughter of Harold Anderson, and I'm the sole owner of Anderson Legacy Holdings, which means that as of this morning, I control roughly $18 billion in assets across this city and this country. Most of you have never heard my name. That was by design. My grandfather hid me from the world for my entire life, and until yesterday, I believed he did it out of love." She paused. "He didn't. And I'm here to tell you the truth about my family, because the truth has been buried for 40 years, and 4 people died waiting for someone to say it out loud." The room went silent in a way that ballrooms full of reporters almost never do, and Emily told them. She told them about Gerald Hayes and the partnership and the stroke. She told them about the forged consent the theft executed against a man lying in a hospital bed, unable to speak. She told them how her grandfather had not only taken the company, but rewritten the story, made the victim into the villain, ruined the Hayes family through 2 more generations. She told them about David Hayes, who died in bankruptcy, still swearing to a truth no one believed. She named the fortune for what it was, half of it stolen, all of it built on a lie. And then, because she had promised herself she would leave nothing in the dark, she told them the rest. She told them about the rigged marriage. She told them that the family attorney Michael Reynolds, who was standing at the side of the room, pale and upright, having chosen at last to stand up, had aimed a man named Nathan Collins at her. 12 years ago, coached him to perform poverty, and spent over a decade with a hand inside her life. She did not spare Michael. She did not spare herself. She told them she had been fooled because she had wanted so badly to be loved that she'd never checked whether the love was real. By the time she finished, the room was making the low electric sound of 100 people who know they're watching history rearrange itself. A reporter near the front stood up. "Ms. Anderson, you're describing crimes committed by your own grandfather. You're describing the origin of your entire fortune as theft. Do you understand that you've just handed us the story that could take everything you have?" "Yes," Emily said. "I understand that completely." "Then why would you do it?" And Emily leaned toward the microphone, and she gave the answer she'd been walking toward for 2 days since a woman took a necklace off her throat and called it an upgrade. "Because the alternative was to keep it," she said. And I've spent the last 48 hours watching what keeping it does to people. It turned my grandfather into a thief. It turned my lawyer into a coward for 4 decades. It turned a grieving young woman into a weapon aimed at strangers. It turned my husband into a man who could perform love for 12 years and feel nothing. Her voice was steady and clear, and it carried to every corner of the room. The money doesn't reveal who a person is. My grandfather told me that, and he meant it as wisdom, but it was really his confession. The money reveals who they always were. And I refuse to find out that who I always was is one more Anderson who chose the fortune over the truth. She paused. So I'm choosing the truth, even though it costs me everything. Especially because it costs me everything. Because a truth that costs you nothing was never really the truth. It was just a story you could afford to tell. Then she announced what she was going to do. The Hayes family portion, the stolen half, was being returned in full to the surviving Hayes heir. That was Victoria. Every dollar of it restored with 40 years of interest publicly on the record, with an acknowledgement that it had been wrongfully taken. Nathan Collins's company, which sat on Anderson land and would revert to Emily's control in 60 days, would be transferred into a foundation to protect the jobs of the thousands of employees who'd built it, none of whom had known they were standing on stolen ground. And the remaining Anderson fortune, the honest half, if any of it could be called honest, would be spent deliberately and completely over the course of Emily's life on the kind of quiet good her grandfather had told her she'd do more of than he ever had. I don't want the empire, Emily said. I never did. I wanted to be loved for nothing, and I found out that nobody loved me at all, and I've decided that's not the tragedy I thought it was, because it means that whoever I become next, I get to become on my own. No fortune making people smile at me, no secret making me lie, no man performing a script. For the first time in my life, I get to find out who Emily Anderson is when she isn't a fortune wearing a woman's face. She looked out at the room. And I'm looking forward to meeting her. She stepped back from the microphone. The story broke across the world within the hour. The weeks that followed were not simple, because the truth never is. There were lawyers, and there were regulators, and there were people who called Emily a fool, and people who called her a saint, and a great many people who couldn't decide which. The Anderson name, which had meant power for 50 years, came to mean something more complicated. And Nathan Collins, stripped of the company he'd performed his way into, discovered exactly what Emily had told him on the phone, that when the performance ended, there was nothing underneath. He lost the buildings, he lost the penthouse, and within a year he lost the last thing he'd been counting on, which was any sympathy from a public that had read in detail exactly what he'd spent 12 years doing to the woman who edited his business plans at 2 a.m. He tried to reach her once, months later, a long message full of apology and memory and one final desperate appeal to the years they'd shared. Emily read it all the way through, and then she did the thing that told her more than anything else how much she'd changed. She felt nothing. Not triumph, not anger, not even pity. She simply understood that Nathan Collins was a man who had never existed, a character Michael had written, and Nathan had performed, and you cannot be haunted by a person who was never real. She deleted the message and went back to her work, and that was the last she ever thought of him. She saw Victoria once more. It was 6 months after the press conference, and Victoria came to the penthouse, and she stood in the doorway the way she'd once stood in the doorway of Emily's old apartment, except that everything about her was different now. The cold poise was gone. The corporate armor was gone. She looked for the first time like what she'd always been underneath a young woman who'd been handed a war before she was old enough to choose it. I didn't take the money, Victoria said. Emily looked at her. I took some of it, for the debts, for the things that couldn't be undone. But most of it I put where you put yours, into the foundation, into giving it back. Victoria's voice shook. Because you were right. The wound doesn't close by taking. I spent my whole life believing that if I could just get back what was stolen, my father would be avenged, my grandfather would be avenged, I'd finally be whole. And then I got it back. All of it. And I felt exactly as empty as I did the day before. She looked at Emily. The only thing that ever made it better was the thing you did that I couldn't understand. Telling the truth. Publicly. With your name on it. Making it known that my grandfather wasn't a thief. Her eyes filled. That's what my father wanted his whole life, not the money. He wanted people to know he wasn't the son of a criminal, and you gave him that. After he was dead, you gave a dead man back his name." She wiped her face. "I came here to say thank you, and I'm sorry. For the necklace. For Nathan. For all of it. I was so busy being the debt that I forgot I was allowed to be a person." Emily crossed the room, and she did a thing that surprised them both. She embraced her. The woman who had taken the diamonds off her throat, the weapon aimed at her family, the enemy she'd been handed. Emily held her, and Victoria held her back, and two granddaughters of two men who had spent their lives at war stood in a penthouse and let the war end in their arms, because someone finally had to, because the wound had to close somewhere, and it might as well close with them. "Keep the necklace," Emily said when they finally stepped apart. Victoria laughed, wet and startled. "What? The necklace. Keep it. You were right about one thing that first day." Emily smiled, and it was a real smile. The patient one, the one that had unsettled Victoria in a doorway 6 months and a lifetime ago. "It does look better on you, and I don't need it anymore. I've stopped keeping things that were only ever about proving I was worth something." Michael Reynolds lost his license. He stood up in the end exactly as he'd promised. He gave a sworn account of everything: the forgery in 1986, the rigged marriage, 40 years of silence, and he did it knowing it would end his career and possibly his freedom. It ended both. And when Emily visited him near the end of the proceedings, he looked older and lighter at the same time, a man who had finally set down a weight that had been slowly killing him for 4 decades. "I want to ask you something," Emily said. "And I want the honest answer because we're past everything else now." "Anything." "My grandfather built a door, a way to give the Hayes family back their half. He buried it deep, and he never used it, but he built it." Emily searched his face. "Did he know? At the end, did he know I might find it? Was that part of the plan, or was I just lucky?" Michael was quiet for a long moment. "He didn't build that door for you to find," he said finally. "He built it for himself. Every few years when the guilt got bad, he'd take it out and look at it and tell himself that someday he'd use it, someday he'd make it right." Michael shook his head. "He never did. He was too much the man the money made. But here's what I think, Emily, for whatever a coward's opinion is worth. I think when he made you promise to find real love when he sent you out to live small and invisible, I don't think that was only about protecting his secret. I think part of him was trying to make one person in this family who wouldn't be the man he was, one Anderson who'd want something other than the money." Michael's voice broke. He couldn't open the door himself, so he made someone who could, and then he hoped. A pause. "You were the door, Emily, not the thing that finds it, the thing that opens it. He built you for exactly this, whether he understood it or not. And it's the only decent thing he ever did." Emily carried that for a long time. She never fully resolved it, whether her grandfather had been a monster who happened to raise something good, or a good man buried so deep inside a monster that he could only reach out through the granddaughter he made. Maybe both. Maybe that was what people were, not photographs after all. Not a single fixed image the money developed, but something stranger and more hopeful. Something capable of building a door to their own redemption, even when they lacked the courage to walk through it. A year after the press conference, Emily stood in front of another crowd. Not reporters this time. It was a hall full of people at a foundation event, hundreds of them gathered around the work she'd built, out of the ashes of the fortune, the returned assets, the protected jobs, the schools and clinics, and second chances that the honest half of the money was buying one at a time in the quiet way her grandfather had once said she'd do more good than he ever had. She thought about that as she looked out at them. He'd been right about that, at least. Out of everything he'd said to her dying in that oak-paneled office 11 years and a whole lifetime ago, that one thing had come true. Someone asked her that night whether she regretted it, whether she ever wished she'd stayed invisible, kept the fortune whole, kept the beautiful story about a grandfather who tested her for love, whether it wouldn't have been easier to never know. Emily thought about the woman she'd been 2 years earlier. The woman standing in a Manhattan living room while a man she'd built her life around unclasped the necklace from her throat and called another woman an upgrade. The woman who'd been small for 12 years because she thought being small was the price of being loved. The woman who'd signed the divorce papers and felt to her own confusion nothing but peace. That woman had thought she'd lost everything that morning. She'd had no idea she was about to find the only thing that was ever really hers. "No," Emily said. "I don't regret it. Losing him was the beginning of finding myself. I spent 12 years being chosen and abandoned and lied to and used, and it turned out that not one person in my life had ever seen me at all." She paused, and her voice was steady and certain and entirely her own. "But I see myself now, and I built all of this, and I gave back what was stolen, and I told the truth that cost me everything, and I became a woman who doesn't need anyone's permission to know exactly what she's worth." She looked out at the room full of the good she'd chosen to do, with a life that had almost been spent being invisible. "The man who left me thought he'd thrown away someone with nothing," Emily said. "He was wrong about that the way he was wrong about everything. He didn't throw away a woman with nothing." She let the words land clear and final and true. "He threw away the only person in that whole story who was ever real, and I have spent every day since being grateful that he did, because the moment he let me go was the moment I finally completely and forever became my own."